Once upon a time, in a kingdom not so far away, there lived a king who was madly in love with a commoner. Now this was no ordinary commoner. She was an American. This twice-divorced woman with the rebellious spirit of an American Rosie the Riveter and the heart of a lioness. No, not that one. Not yet. Anyway, Edward fell hard, like really hard. Some said harder than any royal had ever fallen before. And he began to plan his life around stolen moments with his American Rose. But for Edward, it was a nightmare. He had two choices. To make matters worse, Edward didn't even wait for his brother to be crowned before announcing his marriage to Miss Simpson. And they lived happily ever after, except they didn't. The marriage was a disaster. Edward became increasingly bitter about his decision to abdicate, feeling that he had been betrayed by his own family and country. Meanwhile, Wallis grew tired of being the scorned woman and took up smoking cigars and having affairs. Yeah, she was kind of a rebel, you know, like Edward loved. That's right. While George was still sorting through the paperwork of becoming king, Edward was gallivanting around London. Oh, and also, a king who gave up his crown for a woman who wasn't even a queen. You know what I'm saying? The British public was outraged. How could their beloved king do this to them? How could he abandon his duty for a woman who was considered unsuitable to be a member of the British monarchy? He could marry a suitable royal and ensure the stability of the monarchy. Or he could marry his American sweetheart and live a life of luxury and scandal. The decision was agonizing, but the choice was ultimately simple. On December 10, 1936, Edward VIII announced to the world that he was giving up the throne in favor of his younger brother, George VI, so that he could marry Miss Simpson. Twice divorced, a title that carried more scandal than a royal pig assassination. Edward's mother, Queen Mary, wasn't exactly thrilled about anything, really. But especially not this, you see. The British monarchy had some rules, namely that you couldn't marry a divorcee, especially not one who was American. Americans were fine. They had lots of them. Just none that were divorced. Twice divorced, thrice divorced, 4 times divorced. Americans were out of the question. It was unthinkable. And the king's infatuation threatened to derail not just his own happiness, but the very future of the monarchy. He wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, and he wanted to marry her badly. Like, look at these pictures. Clearly, a man in love, so much so that he was willing to give up everything for her, including his crown. See, Edward was next in line after his brother, the Duke of York, to become king. But he didn't care. When his brother died suddenly, in 1936, Edward found himself on the throne with the daunting task of choosing a bride and producing an heir. The king, Edward VIII, was a modern man. He drove a fast car, smoked cigars, played a mean game of golf, and had a weakness for all things jazz. But the one thing he loved most in the world was his little telephone box. A charming cottage in the English countryside, where he could escape the pressures of royal life and be with his beloved They met in 1931 when Edward, then Prince of Wales, was on a royal tour of America, and he saw her back in England. The royal family was not exactly thrilled about this new romance, but Edward was smitten. Now, usually this would be the proudest moment of a prince's life, second only to, well, actually, being born. It was the first abdication crisis in the history of the British monarchy. And it all came down to one woman. But Edward didn't care. On June 3, 1937, He married Wallis Simpson in a private ceremony at a chateau in France. In the end, their marriage was a sad and lonely one. Which is a shame because there's nothing sadder and lonelier than a king without a country.